about your work, Lydia? Because it touched on that aspect as well, but from a very different topic. So I think it would be a good transition to your work at this point.
Great. I do have slides. Would you like me to use them? Or yeah. Okay, hold on a sec. You seeing this? Okay. So as I mentioned in the brief introduction, I have been working on radicalization and terrorism, mostly jihadi extreme Islamism, and mostly through interview-based work across the Middle East, but also when ISIS went so global, my research did too. And in December, when I joined the Cybercrime Center, one of the things I was aiming to do was to start a sub database on online jihadi material. The Cybercrime Center have been collecting extremism material for a while already, but focusing on the far right. And this is an example. I'm just going to run through my experience of actually starting to collect data of online jihadi material. Okay. Now, why isn't this? It's not. Anyway. Okay, so quick overview of jihad and counterterrorism because it's relevant. Of course, 9/11 was the sea change really in terrorism in terms of its perception worldwide and research, especially funding, and of course the Western response, which was the war on terror. Now, this was a war framed as a war. It was a direct war in terms of military action, but also there was a plethora of initiatives in terms of intelligence and counter messaging and all the rest of it. Muslims worldwide, whether extreme or not, began to feel like they were under suspicion. It fueled a lot of paranoia and secrecy. Then came another major sea change, which was when the Islamic State in Iraq, ISI which was initially an offshoot of Al-Qaeda, it saw the chaos next door in Syria and rushed and took advantage of that to implement their major aim, which was a caliphate. So they got territory. Now, this was a major change because they began much wider recruitment than Al-Qaeda ever did. So the entry barriers to joining went down, recruitment went up. Part of that was a radical change in the use of social media. They were major and they had strategies for social media. They had whole entire media rooms full of people tweeting. And so the visibility went up hugely. So the responses, there was a coalition, military coalition, but at the same time, which is less known, there was a coalition to address their messaging. And that was in the form of counter narratives, but also recruiting the tech companies to drive them off platforms, which was hugely successful. You don't see any of this material on Twitter anymore, for example. But the results were the migration to ever smaller platforms and higher entry barriers to joining through, for example, through Telegram. You had to really prove your credentials to join a lot of these channels. So that's kind of quite an implication for research. So where are we now in terms of finding the material online? So first of all, there are official channels still that are propagated, they're publishing videos, magazines, articles, lectures all the time through official channels. So they're quite obvious. I mean, they do move, but they're normally exactly the same website name with a different country URL, So that's all quite easy to find, but it is propaganda, it's very repetitive. And so what we're more interested in are the supporters. Now, why are people supporting? Why are they joining? What are they interested in? What radicalizes them, their trajectories, all of these sorts of things. Those supporters groups are much, much harder to find for all the reasons I've been through, the paranoia and the migration and being forced off the main platforms and things. So what do we need? kind of, I've said on the ground, but it's obviously online on the ground, which is the people who are hanging out in the chat rooms silently, normally, because of ethical reasons. You know, they're not kind of tempting the jihadis to criminalize themselves, but they're just lurking, observing. But they need to be constantly vigilant in order to migrate with the groups as they go from channel to channel or platform to platform. So in terms of me coming along and trying to find all of this thing, I'm looking for experts, basically, the people who are already doing this. They are part of these channels. Experts break down into various different forms. We've got the ones that are really keen to help. They are both in academia and in the NGO world, the think tank world. They really see the value of what the Cybercrime Centre is trying to do, which is establish a robust form of both scraping and storing. So it's going to be longitudinal data and also open to researchers, having that access for researchers in the long term. There are experts doing things very differently. So jihadology.net, I thought we'd be a natural fit with Aaron Zellin, who runs that. And it's not even his job. He gets up every morning, and this is quite separate to his job. He scans all the official channels that I mentioned, and he uploads them manually to his website. And he tags them, and he offers translations for a fee. And that's a really useful job to be doing, all the official propaganda in one place. But he just said when I approached him, yeah, what you're doing is great, but it's got nothing to do with what I do. So, which is fine. We complement each other. The resources are going to be online. But he just wasn't that interested in joining forces. And then there are some who, it turns out, and I had no idea about this trend, they're monetizing the data. They're collecting it themselves, and they're turning it into a resource for researchers, but also governments, international agencies who are trying to address the problem. They're offering kind of analysis packages or data packages for money. So we represent the very worst sort of competition for them, because we're offering what they're offering for free. And so, yeah, that was an unexpected kind of barrier for me. I didn't realize that would be on the table, really. So what are we doing? I've been identifying those helpful ones, the ones who are constantly vigilant, who are part of these networks, however silently, and they do want to collaborate. And luckily for us, there are lots of them around. Now we need to constantly follow up with them. This isn't their job. You know, it's not their job to collect for the Cambridge Cybercrime Centre. So it's a question of just checking in with them quite regularly, saying, oh, is there any new Telegram channels or whatever it might be, which is my job, really. And then there's an interesting information feedback loop, because we can say, oh, that one's being closed down. Where do you think they've all gone? And they'll say, oh, thank you for letting us know. And they go off to find the individuals and where the individuals are now, because they're often following the same individuals on different channels. So hopefully what we're getting to is establishing this longitudinal data set of material posted by the supporters of Islamist groups, which is a constantly evolving landscape, and we make it available for researchers. And I look forward to your questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much on sharing the insight of working with different people who are working on the same topic. And I think that's one of the main topic of this session as well, as this interdisciplinary collaboration. And I guess one of the main questions I have is what are one of the biggest challenge that you have personally encountered perhaps when trying to identify data sets? So as Lydia has mentioned, the Cybercrime Center is collecting extremism, but more so on the far right side of things. And I personally am working on that, where like you mentioned, it involves of going through different Telegram channel, Discord channels, and trying to identify and keep track and making sure they're up to date, making sure that those that are closed, understanding where they have migrated to potentially, or where they pop up again. So And personally, I find it can be very draining to a certain degree, reading through these materials, trying to find them. So I guess this is to both Lydia and Sergio, what are your thoughts on that process? Is it possible to potentially automate that process in the future, or is it something that requires more, manual labor, where someone sits down with expertise on the topic, sits down and actually try to find these materials and data?
I'm happy to jump in. I don't think that the jihadi stuff can ever be automated because they're migrating too quickly. We do need that combination of qualitative and quantitative work. And in terms of a trend that is so dispersed worldwide, it's a very fine-grained approach. We need experts who are observing these platforms individually. I don't see the possibility of automating something like this, but I'm happy to hear the opposite if anybody does have any ideas about that kind of thing. But I can't see how it could happen, which is why we're an interdisciplinary setup. That we need that feedback loop, I would say. Sergio, do you have anything to add?
No, I totally agree, because when we started with the forums and all the data that is there. I mean, as I explained, we were able to, starting in 2016, we got data from 2007 and 2008. So because it's something more static, but the problem is that the need for going to Telegram channels or any instant messaging app or things that are more volatile and more dynamic, I think somehow we could create technology to quickly scrape and get this data. But again, as you said, Lydia, we need experts and interdisciplinary research and experts telling which are the interesting channels or what could be the potential movements of all these people, just to be there and get the data in advance. Of course, later on, I mean, crawling data and getting the data from, at least in the case of Telegram channels, is from the technical point of view is kind of easy. But the problem is where to go, how to select what is the interesting data and all this. I agree. I think it's one of the most important challenges that we need to address nowadays. And also not just what channels, but what makes a channel fit for like far-right extremism or something, because sometimes there are channels where many sort of miscellaneous topics are being discussed. Potentially in all these, there is some discussion regarding, I don't know, one potential attack or someone is trying to attract people to the jihad or things like that, but this in maybe some weird channel that we will never know. So I think it's really challenging. It's really a problem nowadays.
That's a really good point about the discussions coming up in totally other places. I mean, we have researchers who work on individual issues that we can utilize, but yeah, certainly jihadi stuff could be coming up in a discussion group on lots of contemporary events, Palestine. And we wouldn't necessarily be monitoring those more general interest channels. So yes, it's a very interesting challenge, and I guess we'll never do it perfectly, but it's a question of, I think, from my point of view, having very good networks that just alert us to these sorts of forums. Meeting, sorry, you were coming in on that.
Oh, yeah, I was just going to say that it is, in fact, very difficult, and that a lot of times these channels or instant messaging app, they do discuss a very wide range of topics. And like you said, and also there will be times where you might find these discussion on places that you wouldn't think to look in the first place. And that seems to be the case with far-right as well. And I think there's a trend to move away from forum as well. I don't know if you have seen this when you're trying to look at data, at least for some of the more like extremism. There's an increasing trend to move off forums, which are the more, I guess, traditional platforms. I mean, there's still some very, strong and platforms are still very active. But I'm at least when I'm personal experience, I see a lot more in like Telegram and Discord. I was just wondering if you see the similar trend with Jihadis or with, underground forums. Is there a movement away from that style platform?
Yep. So I think they are. And indeed, we have a very recent and clear example with all these ransomware groups that were operating a ransomware campaign as a service, and they were freely advertising themselves in forums. Because of the latest attacks and the great impact and global impact that this has nowadays, and society has moved. Of course, the forums have decided to ban them, and they will move to somewhere else. Probably channels. We'll know dark web is unclear. This happened before with all the stressor and booter services. And I think at the end, they need to visualize themselves. They need to reach the audience and reach the client. This is a business, so they need to advertise them. So forums were a good place because it's easily accessible for everyone. So the same as researchers have problems finding the information, anyone has problems finding such information. So they need to be somehow there. But of course, when there is some threshold or some limits, or when the US says, hey, we don't like this anymore, and probably is where the forum administrators is kind of a single point of failure. No? So probably they need to adapt, and they need to move. I think it's happening. There might be other businesses or other interesting things to look at in the forums, but I think the future, the actual flash of cybercrime data should be looking in other platforms.
Yeah, the jihadi stuff is kind of strange because it just goes through different trends, and some of them pop up again. I mean, we had a bunch of Saudis who were quite extreme just make use of Parler suddenly. And I think it was because Parler got so much attention in the news around the Trump time. And it was saying all its things about freedom of speech and the commitment to non-censorship and all the rest of it. I think a bunch of people in other movements thought, oh, that's useful. And so I think it's, rather than trends, I think a lot of these groups are extremely opportunistic, and they're going to grab onto any platform they can. And if that's in the form of a different sort of protected forum, they might just go back to that style of communication. I mean, yeah, it's all gone on to lots and lots of messaging systems like Signal, of course, that, the very high security ones. And there's a bunch of them, aren't there? Wicker and Threema and all the ones that you have to actually pay for. And so, yes, we are seeing a trend away from that more public one, but I don't rule out seeing a return to some of the public ones. And, Eating, in your work, the far right material, what we've seen, especially with Trump, is mainstreaming of what 10 years ago we would have called hate speech. And now it's become extremely mainstream, that's going to have an effect. What's socially acceptable to say is going to have a huge effect on where we see the discussions happening.
Yeah, indeed. And it's interesting that you said that they go through different phases. I think for some reason that's thinking about fashion styles. They come in and then 20 years later they'll come back again. But so that proves to be very difficult for data collection as well, right? Because then it almost becomes a full-time job having to track these movement of individuals and organizations as well. And increasingly for the far right movement, from what I've seen, is that a lot of them are also using paywall, so you have to pay to subscribe. in order to access content on the website. And they're not, so there will be a forum perhaps, or at some of the meeting or podcast, broadcast, blog, all these information are now behind a paywall. And I think that poses an interesting question for researchers is, do we need to pay to access this information? And I think this also applies to underground forum, because some of these forums do require some sort of payment or demonstration of skills and knowledge in order to gain access. So I'm curious to see, what are your thoughts on that?
It does sound pretty unethical to add to the coffers of an extremist organization by paying for their content. I mean, what do you do? It's intriguing to know what the differences are. It's a great research opportunity to see what's going on behind a paywall and how different that is. I would say that, would you pass an IRB for that?
Yeah, I was going to say so, that if, depending on the research, and here again the ethics are really important, and this is why we have the research board, ethic research boards, and here I want to mention again the benefits of data sharing, no? Because if one researcher has paid for that and has collected the data, another researcher should not go and pay again, and this is something interesting. I think initiatives like the Cybercrime Center or any data sharing platform that gives data, of course, for free, but with legal agreements or whatever, are a good approach to deal with that, because of course, I guess journalists, law enforcement, probably they pay and they have access because they have interest, but as academia, as researchers, we could somehow create this group or cooperate among us for this purpose, because of course we don't want to we don't want to give money to all these sites, but maybe if there is a public interest in doing so, why not?
And I think these are questions that are going to be more of concern as research in cybercrime and cybersecurity continues. And because, I mean, these organizations or platforms or groups that we study, they are aware that they sometimes are being observed. And so they would choose to move to behind closed platform or, paywall and options like that. So I think this is going to increasingly be a challenge that, with that researchers or anyone that's collecting data will face. And I guess one of the questions I have for you, because you guys are from two different backgrounds. So Lydia is from a more social sciences background, and Sergio is more computer science. So what are your thoughts on, what is a true interdisciplinary approach to data collection and storage? Because I think storage is also a big issue with the volume of data that, like, for example, at the Cybercrime Center with the underground forums, we have millions of posts. So, I mean, to a certain extent, there's technical component in this process. So what are your thoughts on that? Like, how do we move forward as a field with regard to interdisciplinary approach?
Sorry. I mean, one thing is what we've already talked about, which is actually identifying the sources requires a pretty manual approach in my field, at least. So we know that it's necessary, and driving the analysis, that feedback is really useful between qual and quant. The way forward, storage is really hard. In fact, I've got a meeting this afternoon. My ex-colleague discovered 2.2 terabytes of ISIS material in a Dropbox folder. Now, what does he do with this? And what do we all do with it? I mean, he's had a look through, but eyeballing, that's what he does. And how do we make that? I mean, storing is one thing. how do we make that available? Who's going to go through and tag what all of these files are? They're called things like strategy doc. You know, they're not very useful. There's PDFs, there's JPEGs, there's a huge range of types of material. And yeah, memes. There's a social media strategy in there. I don't know. That's something I haven't actually dealt with, but it's a great challenge that I'm looking forward to discussing with everybody. Sergio, do you have any clues for me?
Oh, no, I think that there are needs here for data collection, data storage, and that data analysis. So there is a good research on how to do this from the computer science perspective. But as you said, we need to know where these files are and what is interesting from these files. And this is something that, for example, when I joined the Cambridge American Center and I started working with social scientists, Alice and others, Ben afterwards, Jitin as well, I learned a lot of things about, okay, what is useful in the sense of what we should be looking at, and then I try to provide my expertise or my knowledge in order to collect this data and then to apply big data analysis in the sense of formats of what the format has. When we are dealing with textual content, like in forums or Telegram chats and everything, I think it's not a big issue. I mean, text is fine. We can compress the text. We can store. There are good storage formats and size. Of course, we need mechanisms to analyze all these. But the problem is when you, as you said, Lydia, what happened when we have docs, PDFs, images? We need good optical character recognition tools in order to extract the knowledge from there. And I think, again, it's not only about it's not only about collection or storage, but also the processing of this data, and we need also all these people working on image processing and visual processing, natural language processing. Andrew is about to give us his insight. And also, again, I learned too much on how to process the data, the textual data, in order to understand the language they're using and all this. So it's sort of a very miscellaneous knowledge. And of course, one single person cannot have all these. So we need these kind of forums or this kind of events in order to learn and meet others to do so. But yeah, it's hard. I wouldn't have an answer to how to process these 2 terabytes of data that Lydia just mentioned, because probably it needs some manual analysis, and this is of course time consuming. And in research nowadays, we don't have that much time in our careers for doing so. Yeah, it's a problem.
I agree, because I have one of the projects I work on, we spend years manually actually going through the social network structure, so how people interacted on a forum level. So we're reading each post and see who is responding to who and trying to construct a social network from there. And doing that manually is definitely takes a lot of effort and time. And you're right, as research is now going at such a fast pace, because the topics we're studying are evolving so quickly. So how do we keep up with that is a challenge in of itself, because by the time maybe we have data collected and we figure out how to construct them, how to analyze them, they have moved on to something else already. And I think that's a common feeling probably the research have, is that we're always playing the catch-up games sometimes. But on that topic, I'm curious. So what is one important thing from other disciplines that had a major impact on your work? And this is one of the questions that was shared. And I'll be interested to see your experience. Or so personally, I have to learn a lot about SQL. That was very interesting because I had never had to use that previously.
So I would say, like in my case, crime script analysis that Alice taught me, and we were able to publish crime script analysis of a whoring in a computer science conference, a top security conference, because I think it's a good way to show how things work. Sometimes in computer science, we need to give numbers, we need to provide figures and tables and say, look how much, look how bad. But sometimes it's, okay, how this is happening, how someone enters, how someone learns, and how someone does something. And I really like it, the way Alice proposed to focus this study. And that was something interesting, because I think that was something missing from the computer science. Okay, why someone will go and do this, and so we know they're doing, but why? So I think there is another panel later or talk about the human aspects in cybersecurity and cybercrime. But I like it a lot about learning about all these view on not focusing on the technical aspects of the attacks, but the human aspects and how they work, the social aspects. So I think that for me, that was really interesting, and actually that changed my research. Since then, I have now more focus, and I like to have all this in my background when doing any other kind of research.
Well, yeah, this whole few months at the Cybercrime Center has really been my first introduction to the actual, what can I say, the real methods. Like, I've read the results, I suppose, of data science, especially in terms of what social media has been doing against extremism. But this has been a massively steep learning curve. And yeah, SQL, Python, all the rest of it I've never done before. And yes, getting to have a real, I don't know, appreciation of the insights that big data can bring with the limitations. I think the Cybercrime Center is very, very aware of what the limitations are of quant-only analysis. So listening to how other people treat data sets and the questions they're asking me and the questions I can't answer and the questions I need to ask about, all sorts of tools being used on big data, like natural language and all the rest of it, machine learning and these techniques. Yeah, it's the intersection, I suppose, that's been most productive for me in this last few months of being at the Cybercrime Center. It's hearing the questions that people ask and being forced to think of my own work from a different point of view, and also trying to make the attempt to really dig down into what other people do. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does perfectly. Because that's how oftentimes, and this is, I think, one of the biggest way COVID has impacted some of the work that we do at the center is we don't have the opportunity to sit down with different colleagues over coffee and just talk about different questions. It's like, there's a topic, let's sit down and discuss. And you will see people think very differently from different fields. And that's very inspiring when it comes to research questions, or thinking about different ways to approach a topic, to study them. So yeah, no, I totally agree with what you said, Lydia.
It's a shame, isn't it? Because also, yeah, I think Zoom encourages a very different way of talking, which is useful and everything, especially when people are in different countries.
Yes.
But it's less kind of brainstorming and more, one person has to speak at once. In a group, there's a very different dynamic when you're drinking coffee around a table. So yeah, I'm looking forward to getting to experience that at the lab, which I haven't yet at all.
So one maybe final parting question as the panel is wrapping up. So in the introduction, I mentioned there's this view back when big data became, I guess, more popular mainstream, or the concept itself, that there's a death to methodologies and theories because we no longer need them, and we can just run statistical model and algorithms to find correlation. I was just gonna say, what are your thoughts on that statement, and how far have we come from that statement? Because that was made in 2008, at least that opinion.
Well, you know my response. Sorry, Sergio, go for it.
No, but I think, I mean, things evolve and the techniques evolve, and of course we no longer need to look at paperwork and a paper for documents and so on. So I think it's fine to move forward and say, okay, if we have this new tool that it complements previous analysis on the way we used to do things, is fine. I think something that what came to me when Lydia said, okay, I'm happy to answer the questions, or not to answer the question, but to provide the questions, okay? Because sometimes it's, okay, what do we need? What are the research questions? And here, I think you, social scientists and criminologists, you know better what is good to ask. And then we can think about what are the best techniques to apply in order to answer these questions, right? So I think this is in the same line as what we were previously discussing on interdisciplinary research. Okay, so let's do the right questions, and then let's put the best techniques in order to answer these questions. So if we need to do a statistical analysis and do correlation, okay, let's do it. If not, if we need to go back and do all research, is fine as well, I think.
Yes, exactly. Like research questions, certainly from the point of view of extremism research, we need to understand really what we're looking at, don't we, in order to even refine the data sets. You know, things like keywords. We need to know the ideology in order to eliminate. I can't, you know, I was working with somebody who didn't realize that Allahu Akbar is just a phrase. You know, when we say, oh my God, or OMG, or whatever, that it just is something that you say in the Arab world. You don't even have to believe in God to say it. But this person thought it was what you said when you blew yourself up, which it is. You do use it then as well. And so, but it's not as significant potentially as somebody might think if they didn't know. So, you know, so I would exclude, for example, OMG from a data set. But if you just were seeing God as a key term, you're going to go down the wrong path. So yeah, you need an awful lot of insight into the overriding issues, which I think is only really got through social sciences, or you could easily go very, very wrong with quant only.
And on that note, thank you very much again for both of you to come to be here and to share your experience and thought and expertise on the topic. It was a great pleasure talking to both of you.
No, thank you. Thank you very much, everybody.
Yep. Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Jitin, for inviting us here, and for the organizers. Well, I will keep watching all these events until my brains let me, because 24 hours is too much. But yeah, there are good talks. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you.